Need sheets? Anybody need papers, papers, papers? Judy won't be here. We don't have to wait for her. Susan will not be here. And Suzanne was already here and went back. She had to have a dentist appointment, so we don't expect anybody else.
How's Rich doing?
Rich doing very well. Recovery is going very nicely and smooth, so
Thank you, God.
yeah, that's good.
No, they weren't happy with the care they were getting down here.
No, I know.
She called me.
That place has really changed a lot since they got taken over by another group.
She was so unhappy she was in tears.
Okay. Huh?
And so she asked me where to go up at Banner, and I told her, and they were all so happy. with
Yeah,
it.
yeah. I'm just not impressed. I'm not impressed with the new dentist over here that took over. I left him right away because he was just worthless, and the dermatology too just left him because I don't know. They just they didn't do a thorough job,
Yeah.
and they're just trying to push people as fast as they can, and I don't
The
need that.
dermatologist you're talking about, is he one right now?
Yeah,
Mike
yeah.
Mike was not happy
Yeah,
with that.
no, as long as the main guy, can't think of his name right now, but the main guy, Harry's guy, the dermatologist down here, Petropolis. As long as he was doing it himself, and he had just a couple of helpers, that was fine. But then he started to get a whole bunch of new staff, and he only did things once in a long while, like for old guys, like old customers like Harry, and. About your parents, and then going on, fifth commandment about murder, sixth commandment adultery, seventh commandment stealing, eighth commandment lying, ninth and 10th commandments about coveting. Okay, so and this was known to people long before even Jesus. Okay, the Jews may have been kind of dense when it came to the Messiah in time of Christ, but they were not stupid. They were able to sum up the second table of the law in love your neighbor as yourself. And God, of course, made this clear, even in the Old Testament, that this was the summary of the rest of the Ten Commandments, 4 through 10. Okay. Now, I will say that something I needed to add here, and I didn't talk about this too much in the notes. Owe nothing to anyone except love. Christians down through the ages, I do make a small reference to this, but Christians down through the ages have taken this verse and kind of run with it. And by that I mean they have said that it is wrong to borrow, especially borrow money. And therefore, borrowing money became kind of illegal in Christianity, even in Judaism. Jews could not charge interest to each other. They could charge interest to non-Jews, but they could not charge interest to each other. Christians also then later on, after the time of Christ, decided they could not charge interest to against other Christians. And of course, Christian became the majority religion, and so the only people who could lend money to Christians were Jews. And the only people who could lend money to Jews were Christians. Jews, for the most part, didn't need the loans, Christians did. And so this caused the Jews to accumulate an incredible amount of wealth because they could charge interest to the Christians, whereas the Christians could not charge interest to each other. And so the large banking houses of the world started in the Middle Ages, actually a little earlier than the Middle Ages, but certainly throughout the Middle Ages, and they were all Jewish houses, families of Jews. And the reason is not because they were bad people or evil or wanted to rip people off, it's because the Christians themselves caused it. The Christians took this verse and other verses and extrapolated from that the idea that you can't charge interest to other believers. And the Bible does not say that at all, nowhere. But that's what they thought. And even going into debt at all among certain groups, like the Puritans, for example, was verboten. Okay, and even in our country, really as time came on, even into the 1800s, for you to borrow money, especially for a long term of some kind, was considered very bad. It was, you were looked down upon if you were a borrower. You know, neither a lender nor a borrower be. Okay, that kind of came from the Puritans and Quakers and stuff, and so that whole idea got a kind of became part of Christianity, even though it's really not in the Bible. That's not, of course, what Paul's talking about. He's not talking about owing as far as money is concerned. He says, owe nothing to anyone except love. So don't owe them vengeance. Don't owe them payback. Don't owe them deference, perhaps. All kinds of other things here. He's saying just put them first, owe them love as a neighbor, as part of the second table of the law, and let that suffice, and let that guide your actions. That's all he's saying. He's not saying anything else. So this is a good example of how certain traditions, certain ideas, certain opinions, certain theories sometimes get attached to Christianity and just take off on a life of their own and become something that, well, gee, everybody knows that. Oh, that's in the Bible. Well, that's what God says. And that's not true at all. Okay, so this is a real good example of how non-biblical things sometimes get attached to Christianity and are considered by a lot of believers as true when they are not. Okay, let's look at the notes here, number 19. The admonition in verse 8 to let no debt remain outstanding forms the bridge between our relationship to the government as taxpayers and our obligations as Christians toward our fellow man. So God is basically saying we have a debt, we have an obligation, we have a duty, we have a responsibility to our fellow man. It's like the parable when the person asks Jesus, who's our neighbor? and he tells them then the parable of the Good Samaritan. The point of that parable is not that Samaritans aren't bad, or that Jews or elders and Pharisees are bad. That's not the point. The point is that the Samaritan saw this Jew as his neighbor, even though the Samaritans and the Jews were hereditary enemies. And so that's the point of the parable. The point of the parable is not that you need to pay for somebody's hotel room or that you need to pay their medical bills. That's not the point. The point is that another human being, whether they're your enemy or not, or whether they're somebody you know or they're somebody you don't know, is a neighbor in the sense of the Bible's concern for other people. Again, they can be believer, they can be unbeliever. Okay? Now, Paul in Galatians does say, let your charity or let your love begin with the house of faith. And that's fine. That's fine. If you have a choice between a believer and an unbeliever, and you only have so much to give, you only have, so much food, or you only have one room or one extra bed in your house, or etc. You only have so much, and you have to choose between a believer and unbeliever. There's nothing wrong with choosing the believer. That's not bad. That is not going against God. Okay? You can choose to do what is good for the believer rather than the unbeliever if you don't have enough for both. That's fine. Okay? But if it's just that person, one person, and that person happens to be an unbeliever that needs your assistance or your help, then do so, whether they're a believer or not. That's the idea. Okay. Next point, being in debt means using someone else's money to satisfy our own needs. Shakespeare wisely advised, neither a borrow nor a lender be, for loan oft loses both itself and friend, and borrowing dulls the edge of husbandry. Husbandry there being labor or incentive. Okay, so in other words, borrowing may keep you from incentivizing or seeking to improve yourself by work. If you can get it free, if you can get it cheap, then maybe you won't work. And Shakespeare is saying that's not good for you. So again, this doesn't come from the Bible. Okay, this doesn't come from the Bible. This business of money, reading into that here, okay, it is a truism as far as that goes, as far as human experience goes. And that's why I put the note here. But it's not necessarily what Paul is talking about here. Next page, number 21, getting in debt often demonstrates, not always, but often, demonstrates a lack of faith in God's power to provide. It has been said that a believer can always pay his bills. Also, people who live on credit have a difficulty returning offerings to their Lord. So, again, this is really outside of the text. This is outside, although the whole idea of debt, as you read this, obviously that's going to come up. That's going to come to your mind, and that's okay. There's no rule against that. As long as we understand that's not what Paul's talking about, then we can go on and talk a little bit about debt and how debt affects our Christian life, okay? And debt does affect our Christian life. Now, there, of course, are ways in which we can get into debt that have little to do with our energy or our work ethic. We can, for example, in my case, and I'll use myself as an example, might as well. When I was in El Paso, our church kind of came on hard times, and I would go to the grocery store, and I had no money in my checking account, and my 5 children needed food. And so I would put it on my credit card. And I hated doing that, but you got to do what you got to do. And finally, after a few months of that, I got a job to supplement my income, And actually, I worked at that job as a teaching job. I taught middle school in El Paso for 5 years because my church really struggled. Basically, it was totally out of my control. We were doing fine. We were paying our bills. We were doing great. And then all of a sudden, the violence over in Juarez got really bad. And the motor companies, the car companies, had plants over there who were putting together parts for cars, and in some cases entire cars. And they were called maquiladoras. That's twin plants, okay? And there were big ones over there. Ford, GM, Dodge, they all had twin plants over there. I think even the Japanese companies did too. Anyway, there were a number of good members of my congregation who worked for Ford and GM, and they were from Michigan, or in some cases Illinois or Wisconsin, and therefore they were Lutherans, and they were Wells. And so when they lived on the west side, because the west side, as Bruce can tell you, the west side of El Paso is a little nicer, a little more affluent area. And so they would live on the west side, and they joined our church. And so at one time, I had probably half a dozen of good automobile people, and they were white collar. They were executive types who lived in El Paso and then drove over to Mexico to run the twin plants, the maquiladoras. Well, again, the violence got so bad, there was a lot of shootouts and things like that happened, that the car companies decided to close those plants and remove their workers from Mexico and from El Paso. And so in 1 year, I lost 9 out of my 10 top givers in the congregation. 9 out of 10. And so that's what happened. And couldn't pay me, couldn't pay our mortgage that we owed to the synod, and stuff like that. So anyway, I'm using credit cards. I get into debt. When I bought that, I had 4 children at that time. Then I had my 5th child, and my 5th child was a little obnoxious, like my children are, of course, and can be. She decided that she had to have a C-section. And that's, of course, a little more expensive, as you might imagine. And then she had some birth problems or problems after her birth. And so I ran up about $40,000 in debt to the hospital, okay? Bruce probably saw my, account due maybe crossing his desk once in a while. I know, but you probably saw it. Go after this guy! What's the matter with him anyway?
Oh, not again.
Yeah, right. Anyway, so I ran up some debts. So again, totally out of my control. I had nothing whatsoever to do with it. It wasn't going out buying dune buggies, or ski-doos, or extra special yachts or something like that. It was just, and so those things happen, and they have nothing to do with trust in God. They have to do with just taking care of yourself and taking care of your family. All right, so that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about lack of faith where it comes to something where it's within your power, it's within your ability to control. And you think maybe you need something. Maybe you need an 84-inch, you think you need an 84-inch television rather than the 72-inch television that you have. Well, you really don't, of course, but you maybe think you do. Well, rather than trusting in God to give you the extra shekels to do that with, you go ahead and buy that and get into debt that way. That's the difference, okay? That's the difference. That's what I mean here by not trusting in God, by having a lack of faith, all right? And the same goes for, do you need a new car, or maybe can you fix the old one? Well, it kind of depends. If you're going to put more money into the car than it's worth, then that's silly, isn't it? That's not good stewardship, all right? So again, this is not cut and dried black and white. Okay, and I've had people come to me, especially young couples sometimes who are struggling in their early years of marriage, and coming to me and say, Pastor, we don't want to get into debt and so on and so forth. And I'll say, well, that's fine. What are we talking about here? Are we talking about something luxurious? Are we talking about something that's really optional? Or are we talking about something that's really necessary to live and survive? Those are the kind of questions that you need to ask. So that's what I'm talking about here. So that goes to the next question: is being in debt a sin? Why or why not? Is it a sin? Now, again, there are churches who will tell you that. There are churches where if you are found out to be in debt, the pastor will come and tell you, you're going to be put under church discipline if you don't take care of this. And that I don't think is right. I don't think that's correct. I don't think that's something that the church should discipline their members for. So I don't think it's a sin, and why or why not? Well, again, there's where the discussion comes in as to what is the purpose. Are you indeed doing something that really you could put off? Really, you don't need, a tuxedo of your own. You could rent it, when you need it. You don't got to go out and spend $1,000 and buy one, all right? Or if you're going to get a new car, maybe you can get a used one for a decent price rather than buying the brand new Corvette, at 50 grand or whatever they are nowadays. You see what I mean? So that's why or why not. It can be, yes, getting in debt can be a sinful activity. If you are just feeding yourself, if you are just, and I mean feeding your desires. If that's all you're doing, is just your wants and your desires take precedence. And you don't care what the future brings, you don't care what this may do to you and your family, then yes, it can be sinful. On the other hand, it might not be sinful if these are things that you need to survive, or maybe you need to get yourself to work, or whatever. So again, it's not a cut and dried black and white type of situation, which some churches, some religions treat it as though it is a just absolute verboten. You can't do it, and if you do it, you're sinning and terrible, and you need to be disciplined. That's not true. Going on, number 22. Having said this, the apostle turns to the only debt a Christian is allowed to have. That is the debt of neighborly love. When Jesus was asked to sum up the 10 Commandments, he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and all your might, and all your soul. And this is the first and greatest commandment. The second, love your neighbor as yourself, as the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. These words not only summarize the 10 Commandments, they give the message to the whole Bible in a nutshell. That is what God's revelation and human life are all about. To love God above all, and then your neighbor above you, and then yourself last. Okay? That is the summary. Perhaps that's even a better summary than John 3:16, although certainly that is a nice summary of the gospel. But if you want a summary of the entire Bible, everything that God wants us to know, then this is a better one, because it involves not only the gospel, but also the law. And not only the law to show your sin, but also the law to guide you in your Christian living. Okay? So really, this section or this verse from Christ is really more of a Bible in a nutshell kind of thing than even John 3:16. Number 23, indeed, love of God and others is the antidote to sexual immorality, murder, theft, deceit, and covetousness. This is why Paul says that love is the fulfillment of the law. If you are busying yourself, if you are keeping yourself with these thoughts, okay, those 2 thoughts, or 3 thoughts, God first, others second, yourself last, if you are busying yourself with those, if you are working on those 3 things, you can't be working on sins like adultery and murder and theft and whatever. Human beings, yes, we can multitask, but really our focus is usually on one thing at a time. And if we're focused on God, and we're focused on others, and we're focused on ourselves last, and we're focused on what God wants us to do, then we can't really be focused on feeding our wants and desires. Okay? And so it's either one or the other. You're either feeding the commandments or your God's will, or you're feeding your will. God's will or your will. That's really what the idea is here. All right. How do verses 8 and 9 bust the myth that sinning can sometimes be an act of love. This was a big deal, of course, as you may remember, some of you. You might remember in the 60s. In the 60s, there came about a whole idea of situational ethics. Anybody want to try to give me an example of the new way of thinking, really in the late 60s, 65, 66, through there? Came out of our universities, of course, came out of our philosophy classes, came out of our social studies classes. Give me an example of situation ethics.
Be true to yourself.
Be true. Okay. Yeah, that took a little longer, but that eventually was a good result, yeah, or an accurate result. Anybody else?
More what benefited you.
Okay, yeah.
If it benefited you, then it was a good ethic.
Okay.
Not necessarily someone else, but
Okay.
for you.
Yeah, and especially when it came to human love. Okay, human love and romance, if you will, or affection, or whether situation ethics basically dictated, well, yes, I can have sex with my girlfriend even though we're not married, because we're in love.
Love the one you're with.
Love the one you're with. Good. Grassroots. Yes, I think. Yes, love the one you're with. Absolutely. That's situation ethics. Or we burn our draft card against the government, or protest against the government, or be violent even against the government, out of love for, let's see, the Viet Cong, all those poor peasants over there in Vietnam that are getting beat up by our soldiers. Okay, so I love them, and so love, that love counters my obedience and duty to my country, or whatever. That's situation ethics. A great example of situation ethics, and I've used this many times, many of you, and as soon as you hear this, you'll go, oh yeah, I remember that. Situation ethics, and this actually came out of a class. It really was. It was actually taught in a class, and that is the old story of the Indians on the warpath. You may remember that. The Indians on the warpath, and all they're doing is kidnapping children. And some of these children, they turn into slaves. Some of these children, they kill. Some of these children, they marry off, whatever. They're not bothering anybody else. They're just taking the white settlers, pioneers' children. And so they're on the warpath, and they come to your door, and they say, hey, you got any kids in here? And of course, you've got 5 children running around the pioneer homestead there, and maybe you've hidden them in the root cellar. And so what do? You've been asked a question. Now, do you tell the truth and say, yes, we've got 5 children in the root cellar here. You're welcome to them, knowing that they might be killed or put in slavery or married off at 12 or 13 to an Indian brave, all right? Or do you lie and say, children, no, we don't have any children. We haven't been given that blessing. Have a nice day. To which the Indian says, thank you very much for your cooperation. We'll be on our way now. And off they go, right? And so the professor, in this particular case, happened to be at Berkeley, of course, gee, shock and amazement. Anyway, the professor says, no, so you Christians in the class, what do? Do you sin and tell a lie? Or do you tell the truth and your children are absconded by these pagan Indians? See, that's situation ethics. The situation would dictate that you lie. And so you sin and you break the rules in order to save your children. Aha, gotcha! Your so-called Christian ethic. You see? Now, what's the problem with that? What's the problem with that?
Everything is God's will.
So you let your children go.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay.
No, I'm saying everything you do is God's will.
So no matter what you do, you're okay.
No, I'm not saying that.
Oh, okay, all right.
But it's God's will. God knows what you're going to do.
Oh, okay, all right. That doesn't answer the question, though. Is it right to sin? Is it right to lie or not? That's the question. That's what the professor said. Is it correct to tell a lie or not? Is lying good or is lying bad? And of course, the answer that he wants people to come up with is, well, it depends on the situation. Ergo, there is such a thing as situational ethics. And so, if you want to shack up with your girlfriend, well, hey, we love each other. So the situation says, yeah, we can do that. You see? That's the point. And so this became kind of the mantra of many people in the 60s and 70s. Well, it depends on the situation. But there again, as far as the Indians on the warpath, what's the answer to that question? It's really simple. What's the answer to that question?
Which one?
What do you lie to the children stealing pagan or not?
I will take the sin.
You'll take the sin. Okay. All right.
The sin of lying to
Okay.
save the children.
Well, but there's the question. Is it a sin? Even. Is it a sin to lie to the pagan, child stealing pagan or not?
Well, they're not believers.
Doesn't matter.
Because what they're doing is a sin as well.
Okay. All right. They're stealing children. Okay. But it goes deeper than that.
It depends if I like the children.
Depends on if they behave themselves, right? If they're good children, right? Yeah. See, that's what you say to your kids. Hey, you better be good or we'll sell you to the Jews, the gypsies, right? My parents used to say a lot, we'll sell you to the gypsies. Yeah. Yeah.
Children are a gift from God, and we are given as parents to protect them.
There you go. Okay. Now, would you say that commandment, so which commandment is that? Well, you could say, I guess that's the fifth commandment or the seventh commandment, either one, that it's your responsibility to take care of your children and keep them from dying. And that's one of the things that are happening to these children. They're being killed. And so you can say, now, does then the fifth commandment overrule the eighth commandment, commandment on lying? Can the commandments be placed against one another so that one becomes more important or than the other?
No. What you're doing is no. You can't do that. You can't question this.
Okay, the principle is all commandments are the same, right? So, and all sins are the same, right? Okay, that's true. God sees all sins as the same. Okay. However, there's another principle. And it's not so much as one commandment against another, it's the principle of salvation. What is life? What is your time of life? What is the biblical definition of your existence on earth, the time from your conception to your death? That period of time is called by the Bible what? How does the Bible, he doesn't use this term, of course, but it describes this time. What is it? What happened? This is the only time that something can happen to you. A particular thing can happen to you.
Well, you're a pilgrim on the earth.
Okay.
To get to salvation.
So what happens while you're a pilgrim? It can't happen before you're conceived, and it cannot happen after you're dead. It can only happen between those two bookends. What is it? Now, you're a sinner when you come in. You're a sinner when you're conceived. We know that. The Bible teaches that. Okay, we're conceived in sin. Okay, so we come into existence as a sinner. All right. So what can only happen to you between that time and the time of your death?
Life.
Faith. Okay. That's why this time is called the time of grace. Okay. It's called the time of grace. And in whose control is this time? God's. Solely, only. Not the devil, not you, not anybody else. Okay? That's the principle. This may be a little off the subject, but this is one of the things that is missed in the abortion debate. Okay, the abortion debate gets down a lot of times to, well, is that human, or is the unborn child human or not, and is it viable or not, and that's not the point. That's not the point. Okay, that person's time of grace began at conception, and that person's time of grace is to be ended only by God. Okay, or if that person is a criminal, for example, God gives the government the right or the police officer the right to end that life. Okay, but aside from that, it's God who stops your heart, or stops your brain, or whatever. It's God that does that. All right, not the devil, not supposed to be other people. It's supposed to be just God that does that. Okay, so that entire span of time is the time of grace. That's a time when you can come to faith. All right? And some may come to faith even before birth. That is possible. Okay? We don't know how likely or how often that happens, but it can. Just like John the Baptist, Isaiah, Jeremiah, others. All right. So that period of time, okay, can only be ended by God. All right? That is the overriding principle over everything else. Salvation. The time to come to faith. And nobody ends that time but God. It's not really even about life. And it's not certainly about the quality of life. It's not about whether you're breathing or whether you're living off your mother's placenta. That is, again, outside the purview of the question. That's non sequitur. That has nothing to do with the question. None of that has anything to do with the question. Okay? The question is, from conception to death, who is in control? God. Not the pagan Indians, and not anybody else. Right? This is what, for example, gives us the right to use deadly force to protect our home, our wife, our children, etc. Okay? This is the basis behind, let's say, the Second Amendment to our Constitution. Okay? That's the basis. When the Founding Fathers were thinking about stuff like this, that's what they're thinking about. They're thinking about Indians on the warpath, frankly, okay? Because that was pretty common at that time. And so that's what they're thinking about. They're thinking about, yes, we can take violent action, for example, to protect the life that we are responsible for. So that's that question about the Indians on the warpath is really not, it's a trick question. It's a question intended to try to get believers to put two commandments at odds with one another. That's the point. That's the professor's point, so that he can try to convince people that Christian ethics should be circumstantial. But it's a false point. You're setting up a false dilemma. Okay? It's not a true dilemma, because overarching all of it is salvation. That is overarching everything. And so you do not interfere with the time of grace. So if you say to the Indian, no, we don't have any children, that's not a sin. You are indeed protecting. That's no more than it was a sin if you pulled out your revolver and shot the Indian between the eyes. Would that be a sin to do that? No, it wouldn't, because you are protecting your children. You see? And so the professor very cleverly gets people to think that the commands of God, the rules, the laws of God, can be put against one another and put in some kind of pecking order, so that, well, love overcomes everything else, and so if I love so-and-so, then I can do whatever I want. Okay? Or, I want to expand my mind. I need to do that. Oh, yes, I need to do that so that I can experience more, let's say, life on a more spiritual level. And so I'll break the law and take LSD. Or I'll break the law and smoke marijuana in those days. Okay? And this was a lot of people would say, yeah, I smoke dope. Yeah, sure, I smoke dope. But I'm expanding my mind. I'm living in another plane, you know. I'm being more spiritual.
Well, you're living in another plane, all right.
And so And so situation ethics, you see, would say, that's okay, you can do that. See, you're experiencing something else. So again, that's a false dichotomy. That's a false contradiction or a false argument. But it's very successful. And a lot of young Christians, especially back in my day, in the 60s and 70s, a lot of young Christians fell for that hook, line, and sinker. And they are today people in their 60s and 70s and 80s who still believe it. And therefore, anything goes as long as you can come up with a reason, a good excuse, all right? And that's one of the reasons. And of course, that's the way they raise their children and their grandchildren. And so that's one of the reasons that our society is in such a mess today, because of situational ethics, okay? All right, let's move on. Next section, 11 to 14. So do this, in other words, God first, others second, yourself last. Do this, knowing the time that it is already the hour for you to awaken from sleep, for now salvation is nearer to us than when we believe. That is a really important point, that right there. Very important point. Every tick of the clock brings us closer to Jesus' return. Of course, we do not know how much closer. And of course, it could be closer as far as our own personal end or the end of the world. So we've got two ends to think about, our end and the end of the world, okay? And of course, they could be, or our end on earth, or this life could be the same, perhaps. But in any case, this verse is always true. This verse is true today, this verse is true tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, because every day we are closer to Christ's return. Again, we do not know how much closer. Are we a year closer? Are we a day closer? Are we 1,000 years closer? We don't know. All we know is that we are closer. In other words, time is progressing to an end point. And the end point, folks, is not climate change. Okay? That is not the end point. It's not when the polar caps melt and San Francisco and San Diego and LA are all underwater. No great loss. Okay? That's not the end point. It's not the end point when the temperature in the whole world is like the Sahara Desert. That's not the end point. It's not the end point when the Russians and the Americans all push the red button and ICBMs go flying back and forth. That's not the end point. That is not it. Those things will never happen. Okay, I can guarantee, I can stand here right now and I can guarantee you that. Absolutely, positively guarantee you that. We, the human beings on this earth, will not destroy it. God has reserved that pleasure for himself and himself alone. We are not capable, as much as we might think we are not capable of destroying this world. All of the dystopian movies out there, all the dystopian stories out there of a world without humans, where the vines and the jungles are overcoming the cities and growing up the skyscrapers, and there's nobody left. That's just pure, unadulterated nonsense. That is stupid. It is foolish, and it is especially unbiblical. That is not going to happen. Now, of course, anything short of that can happen. All right, so it might get unpleasant, yes. We might have to find someplace else to live if we have a bungalow on the beach. That's possible. Okay? We might have to dig a hole and live underground for a while to escape nuclear radiation. That is possible. But the whole world is not going to be destroyed. Okay? It's not. That's not going to happen. Okay? It's not going to happen. Don't let anybody convince you of that. That is not going to happen. All right? We have an end point of history, and the end point of history is Jesus coming over the eastern horizon. We know that because that's what the Bible says. Okay? That Jesus comes over the hill. When Jesus comes over the hill, history, time will stop. That'll be it. Whistle blown, everybody out of the pool. Okay? So until that, that's what's going on. Waken from sleep for now. Okay. So that being the case, we should be awake spiritually. Doesn't mean we can't sleep. Okay? But we shouldn't sleep spiritually. We should always be aware of our spiritual surroundings. Now, if we want to care about the economy, or we want to care about the environment, or we want to care about the whales and the porpoises, or the tuna, or we want to care about the squirrels, or whatever, okay, that's fine. But first and foremost, we need to care about the spiritual environment, the spiritual atmosphere. Okay? We need to be awake spiritually. What is going on spiritually? Okay? And for example, just what I was talking about, our society is more and more and more pagan. I didn't say heathen, by the way. There is a difference. Anybody want to explain the difference between pagan and heathen? What's the difference between pagan? Yeah.
A heathen could be actually moral,
That's true, yes.
but a pagan is lost.
Well, yeah. Think of this. A heathen is somebody who has either no God or doesn't care. So a sociopath, for example, is a heathen. They don't care. They don't care if there's a God or not. Or an atheist, that's a heathen. Okay? Now, there have always been heathens, but there's also always been pagans. Pagans are those who worship false gods. And so the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, those are pagans. They worship Zeus, Ra, Isis, blah, blah, blah. And many Christians today, do not worship the one true triune God, as I mentioned in my sermon. There are a lot of those people, like Thomas Jefferson, for example. He was adamant, very adamant, that he was a Christian. He was vociferous on the matter. He was eloquent to the extreme. He objected when anybody called him less than a Christian. Whoo, he got mad. I am a Christian. John Adams, same way. I am a Christian. Even though they're non-Trinitarians, they didn't believe in the Trinity. And Jefferson did not believe in miracles of any kind. None of Jesus' miracles, including the virgin birth. He didn't believe in any of those. But he demanded to people call him a Christian. Okay? He was a pagan. He worshiped a God that does not exist. Okay? That God did not exist. Alexander Hamilton, James Monroe, a lot of those people were pagans. They worshiped a God who did not exist. Okay? The God of the deism, for example. Okay? Or the all-seeing eye. Okay? Those are pagan. Hindus, they're pagans. Buddhists are pagan. Not heathens. They're not heathens. They have a God. Okay? They have a God. But it's a false God. It's an idol. Okay? So they're pagans. All right? So in this world now, our atmosphere, the spiritual atmosphere, is full of pagans. We have people who worship a non-existent God. The American religion, not the biblical religion, the American religion, which is basically, believe in God, whoever he or she happens to be, and do good. And those that do more good than bad, they'll make it to heaven. That's the American religion. Okay? That's a pagan religion. Okay? And of course, good depends upon your definition. And so, to one person, good is, again, saving the whales. Okay? To another person, good is saving some other group that might be at opposition with the whales. Who knows? All right? Yeah. All right, okay, who are you going to save? Well, here's a good one. Who are you going to save? You're up in Canada. Who are you going to save? Are you going to save the polar bears or are you going to save the seals? Well, if you want to save the seals, you got to get rid of polar bears because that's their number one meal is seals. On the other hand, if you want to save the polar bears, you should want them to eat the seals. So which one are you going to save? Okay? And so some people decide the ultimate good is rescuing seals from the Eskimos, or whatever they're called, Inuit nowadays, who clubbing the seals on the head to eat them and wear their fur. Okay? So they're out protecting them. On the other hand, there are a lot of other people who say, oh, no, that's not important. What's really important is saving the polar bears. That's a good. That's our definition of good. So our definition of good is different from your definition of good. Okay? So the American religion is a dangerous religion. Because number one is pointed at a God that does not exist. And number two is pointed to work righteousness, but the works, whether they're good or not, totally depend on the definition of the individual. And that, folks, is called anarchy. So you've got people breaking the law to support the Palestinians, and then you have other people breaking the law to support the Jews. Why? Because, well, that's good to them, and the others, it's good to them. So that's nonsense. So this is what this means. Be aware of your spiritual surroundings. What is going on in your society? Where is your society at religiously, spiritually? And our society today, and it has been for many, many years now, our society is pagan. This is the post-Christian era. There is some discussion and debate upon when the post-Christian era began. Some will say after the last Great Awakening, some would say in the 1830s, others would say maybe the 1880s, others would say 1910s or 1920s, whatever. Some other would say 1960s. But certainly from the 1960s on, certainly from then, the society has become more and more pagan, more and more unbiblical, more and more unchristian, unbelieving. And the number of believers continues to shrink down to a very small remnant. All right. And this too, let me just throw one more thing in. This is too what I mean when I'm talking about the church dying, okay? The church will never die. There will always be Christians somewhere. There will always be believers. And the believers will always be meeting together to encourage one another, read the scriptures, receive the sacraments. The only difference is you may have to look a little harder sometimes than others. Think of it this way. When, let's say your parents or grandparents, whatever, well, let's just say a generation after World War II. Okay, let's say the GIs after World War II, okay? When they came back, the ones who survived the war and came back and got married and started raising families, they looking for a church to go to. A lot of them were like my father and others, you know, who made all kinds of vows to God. You know, if I get out of this alive, boy, I'm going to be a real churchgoer, okay? All right, nothing wrong with that. Anyway, how hard was it in 1949, 1948, whatever, how hard do you suppose it was for those young couples and their 1-year-old or 2-year-old, how hard was it for them to find a church with true law and gospel, true biblical teaching around them? How hard do you suppose that was? On a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the hardest. How hard was it for my father and mother leaving Davis, California, after he graduated from the University of California, and going to Yuma, and to find a church to go to where Jesus was taught as the Son of God, and the commandments were taught as the rule of God, and so on and so forth?
Not too hard.
No, I would give it a 1.
Yeah, really, yeah.
I would give it a 1, okay? And I think you could say the same thing for any town or any county or any state in the United States in 1948. Or 50 or 54 or 58 or 59 or 60 or even 65 or 66. Now, the next generation, my generation, the baby boomers, okay? I got married in 74. All right, 50 years ago. Wow, that's a long time. Anyway, how hard was it for my generation to find a church like that?
Maybe 4 or 5.
I'd say at least a 3, a good solid 3. How hard was it for my children, the next generation, to find a church like that?
6, 7, 5.
Yeah, 5 plus. All right, okay.
Nowadays,
Or let me put it this way: did they even try? No, a lot of them gave up. A lot of them said, "Nah, I'm not even doing that." Okay, and frankly, a lot of them, like the friends of my children, they don't care. I mean, church is the absolute last thing on their minds. All right. So that's what I mean. That's what I'm talking about here. Be aware of your spiritual surroundings. Be aware of your spiritual circumstances. Be aware of the spiritual atmosphere going on around you. And our spiritual atmosphere has gone into the dumper. And that's what I'm talking about when I say the church is dead. I'm not talking about, everything's an emergency and, we have to go to the bank and borrow $1 billion just so we can pay our bills. No, it's not gotten to that yet. But I'm not being cynical. I'm not trying to depress you. But the fact of the matter is that looking at time, certainly as time winds down, and the Bible says, Jesus says this. What does Jesus say? In those last days, will you even find faith on earth? He asked the question. That's a rhetorical question. Yes, you will, but what does that tell you? It will be hard. This is Jesus himself asking the question, a rhetorical question to his followers. In other words, as the days get worse, it will be harder and harder to even find a faithful group so that you can worship the one true triune God in true faith and praise. That will get harder and harder and harder and harder and harder. Okay. So that's what I'm talking about. And so don't take me wrong. I'm not being negative. I'm not being cynical. I'm not trying to depress anybody. I'm just saying this is what history shows. This is what the Bible says. This is what God's Word teaches. And so we should not be surprised. All right, let's go on. The night is almost gone and the day is near. And the day, of course, he's talking about is the last day. Therefore, let us lay aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. So if the day is coming, if the time of Christ is coming, how should we act then? Should we act Christ-like or non-Christ-like? Well, obviously, we should act Christ-like. We should follow Christ. We should act, even as the time gets worse and worse, we, the believers, should act better and better. See? That's the idea. And so what's going to happen is you, the believers, are going to stick out like a sore thumb more and more and more. Think of it this way. Think of a good old subdivision, after the war, and the subdivisions are popping up everywhere, Del Webb homes, big tons of them. And Sunday morning comes, and you're watching. Okay, you're standing at the end of the block and you're watching. You're just looking out, taking your dog for a walk. And Sunday morning comes around, 1962. Okay, what do you see? All the houses are the same. Okay, they look exactly alike. Everybody's got the Ford station wagon or the Chevy station wagon or the Pontiac station wagon in their driveway. Everybody's got 4 or 5 kids. Okay, and you're standing out there at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning. What do you see? Both sides of the street. Everybody comes out of their homes. All the kids are dressed real nice. Okay, mom and dad is all in their bib and tucker. Everybody climbs in their station wagons. Okay, and off they roar to church. Right? They don't stick out. And maybe you stick out because your church is late and so you can walk the dog instead. But you don't stick out. Nobody sticks out. Everybody looks the same. Now, fast forward to 2022 or 2024. That was during the plague. So 2024. Okay, and you stand at the end of that same block. Now those houses are 60 years old. Their grandchildren are living in them or whatever. and you're watching, and all the SUVs are parked out there, right? And everybody has one or maybe two children if you're lucky. And 9 o'clock Sunday morning comes and you're watching, and one family comes out, dressed nice, gets in their SUV, heads off to church. They stick out, don't they?
Yes.
They're different. That's what I'm talking about. That's what Paul's talking about. Okay? So as the times get worse, you are going to stick out like a sore thumb more and more and more. People are going to look at you and go, what are you doing?
I think we do now.
What are you doing? Don't you know there's a big sale at Wally World?
In the sports games.
Yeah, don't you know that the Cardinals are playing there in Glendale? No, come on, what's the matter with you? Don't you know that there's a hockey game on or a golf tournament to watch? What's the matter with you? Are you crazy? So more and more, we're going to seem like crazy people. We're going to seem like we are unusual. Moving on. Let us behave properly as in the day, not in carousing and drunkenness, not in sexual promiscuity and sensuality, not in strife and jealousy. So this is one of those lists. St. Paul loves lists. And so he likes to list sins and categories of sins, and he likes to list righteousness and categories of righteousness, and he's wonderful at that. All through his letters, he's got these lists, and he loves to make lists. So carousing, what are we talking about there? Carousing is basically, some translations would put licentiousness. Some translations would say debauchery. Debauchery was a special kind of party. Debauchery was a party in the Roman Empire where somebody would literally, at the end, lose their heads. To debauch somebody, this is your botch. Okay, this is your botch, your baka. Okay, cabeza de vaca, right? Right? Cabeza, all right? But anyway, this is your when you play bocce ball, basically your head, you're throwing your head. Okay? So debauchery means to lose your head. And these parties, you would lose your head, you would become drunk to the point of losing consciousness, but then usually somebody at that party, usually a slave, would be executed. Just for fun. Just for entertainment purposes. Okay? That was debauchery. Okay? That was debauchery. So that's what it's translated sometimes as. Drunkenness, sexual promiscuity, and sensuality. Now that sensuality is an interesting word. Sensuality basically means you give in to your senses, and that could be any sense. It could be a sense of sight, so pornography. Could be the sense of hearing, so crazy, wacky music, whatever. Could be your sense of smell, all right? So strange smells, whatever. Your sense of taste or food, so you eat so that you have to go to the vomitorium, okay? They actually, all these Roman villas had vomitoriums in them. They were specifically designed for after you eat so much, you have to abchuck. You go to the vomitorium and then you come back and you eat some more.
And Hollywood thought that they were the ones that
invented that. Yeah, they were wrong. It invented 2,000 years before. So sensuality, giving into your senses. And this is the number one addiction in our world today, is giving into our senses. Okay? That is number one. Okay? Giving into senses. And especially our emotions, which is basically a sense. We have become an incredibly emotional people who judge everything based on how we feel about it. Objectivity has nothing to do with it anymore. Facts have nothing to do with it anymore. Look at our political situation. Great example. Look at our political situation, okay? Ask anybody, oh, why you go vote for XYZ person, whatever, it doesn't matter what the person says. Oh, because I feel he or she is better. Do you have any facts to back that up? I don't care. How can you vote for so-and-so? That so-and-so, he's such a bad person. Or that so-and-so, such a bad person. How do you know that? Oh, I just feel it. Can't you see that? Isn't that obvious? No, it's not. Give me some facts. Who cares about facts anymore? Nobody cares about facts anymore. It's all feeling, you know? That's what the news is. That's what the media is, all based on feeling. That's what they want to do. They want to grab you. That's why the old saying, if it bleeds, it leads. Okay, turn on the news at night. Okay, what do you see? You see the 4-car pileup on the interstate. That grabs your attention. Ooh, look at that. Wow. Look at all that blood and guts. Wow. Okay? If it bleeds, it leads. Yeah.
Did you happen to see Nancy Pelosi debating?
I haven't seen her in a long time. Is she still alive?
No. Did you see her debating somebody at Oxford University?
No, I didn't. No.
You have got to watch this.
Oh, okay.
She gets her anchor set straight.
Wow. Huh.
I mean, and then you hear her in the background trying to argue with this kid, and she's making herself look so stupid.
Yeah.
And it's
Well, she
all
isn't too
about
bright
this
anyway.
She is.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
she is,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, she's got that shock look on her face
Yeah.
ever since she had her eyebrows.
Yeah. Wacky. Last verse. So put on the Lord Jesus Christ. Put on the Lord. So, yeah, that's tough. That's hard to do. That means act like Jesus himself. Wow. That's tough. Huh? And make no provision for the flesh in regard to its lusts. In other words, put that down. Again, put yourself last. And your desires and your wants and even what you might think is your needs, put those last. Put God first. Put Christ first. And everything else last. And that is to be our way. We'll look at the ending notes to this chapter next time. A couple pages of those, it looks like, yeah. And then we'll move on to chapter 14 eventually. Questions?
I have no clue if I'm anywhere else.
I understand. Not a problem. Let's close then. May the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be and abide with us all. Amen.